broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone and thank you for attending today's webinar on the move to wireless ATM deployment in Asia Pacific, current trends and future direction. This webinar is presented by Catherine Brown and Michael Johnson from TNSI. As we know, ATM telecommunication continues to represent the second largest operating cost for deployers, and today's presentation from TNSI will certainly give us an insight to what models deployers have chosen to adapt and whether they perform adequate in all areas. Before we proceed with today's webinar, I would just like to share a few details. I'm Sandra Smith, Executive Director for the Asia Pacific region for ATMIA. ATMIA has led the way for over 20 years, and we have supported the ATM industry and continuously assisted members and their business needs, helping them to save time, money, and providing valuable resources through education opportunities, advocacy, connection to other members within the industry, and visibility. Next slide, please. Being a member means you're part of a global network of the ATM industry leaders, and some of the benefits for being an ATMIA member includes access to best practice, white papers, position papers. We have a cash repository that offers a wide range of current data and information about the global role of cash in society. We have the next gen ATMs. This is a consortium. We have now reached approximately 170 delegates from 43 countries, future-proofing the role of our industry for the years to come. It's free to join this global movement and to ensure the technology stays relevant for the next generation. ATMIA offers a career centre focusing on jobs within the ATM community. And of course, our membership. As a member, you'll have access to education opportunities, advocacy services, connection and visibility with over 11,000 members worldwide. So we welcome you to consider, if you're not a member, please consider joining ATMIA and feel free to contact me anytime. Next slide, please. In 2019, this region will be hosting the ATM Innovation and Security Congress that is going to be held in Kuala Lumpur on the 19th and 21st of November. This is a 3-day event and will bring industry participants together from around the world to discuss and solve problems and to harness the opportunities that await in the future. For any further details on this event in terms of registration, exhibiting, sponsorship or marketing opportunities, we encourage you to visit our website or to contact me again directly, sandra.smith@atmia.com. Once again, I'd like to thank you for your time today and being part of this forum. ATMIA has a lot on the horizon, and I look forward to working with you all. Now moving on with today's forum, I would like just to share a few housekeeping items. Your dashboard is on the right, and you can open and close this throughout the webinar by clicking on the orange box with the arrow in it. On the dashboard, you'll find all features which I'm going through with you in the next step. You've joined this webinar using VoIP or by dialing in a telephone landline. If at any point you get cut off or you can't hear well using the VoIP, then select audio option in the dial-in and you'll be given the dial-in numbers with the webinar access code and an audio pin. All attendees are in listen mode only, So if you're not able to, so you are not able to ask any questions verbally. Please submit your questions in writing through the question area on your dashboard. Feel free to send them to us during the presentation. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. We are recording this webinar, so if at any point you're called away over the next hour or so, don't despair, because we'll be sending you all a link to this recording tomorrow. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers from TNSI. Catherine Brown, she's the Director of Product Management at TNS and is responsible for a range of payment network products which collectively represents 65% of the total divisional revenues. With over 15 years payment industry experience, Catherine is highly talented at understanding customers and market needs in translating these into product strategies. Joining Catherine today is Michael Johnson. He is the Managing Director of TNS FinTech Solution Business for the Asia Pacific region. He oversees a diverse team based across Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, Singapore, India, Thailand and Malaysia, and the Philippines. Michael is responsible for identifying the driving growth and works alongside the wider TNS leadership team to set the company's FinTech strategy. So I thank both Michael and Catherine for their time and presentation today, and I'll now hand this forum over to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you for giving TNS the opportunity to take part in this webinar. And we are very proud of our global ATM membership and look forward to many years of working together within the ATM industry. So first of all, today we're going to talk about ATM connectivity, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for those of you who perhaps might not be familiar with the transaction network services business, as to why we're in a good position to understand ATM connectivity. So I think there are a few stats that are in the process of coming up on the slide deck. The first, just to sort of give some context into the TNS business. So in 2018, we carried approximately 33 billion transactions, payment transactions, over our network around the globe. Now, of those, they are a mixture of ATM and POS transactions primarily. We have over 105,000 ATMs under TNS Comms management. Specifically, when we look at SIMs, we've got over 1 million SIMs that go into a mixture of our ATM products, and also we have sort of direct SIM products that go into our POS estates. And so this is a business that we understand. We've been supporting the ATM industry for many years now, and we look forward to continuing to work within the ATM market across the world. Next slide, please, Amber. So if we just come to the agenda of what we're going to cover today, it's 4 key topics. So we're going to start by looking at the traditional operating methods that have been used in ATM deployments, and then we're going to compare and contrast those with the trend that we see of the move to wireless connectivity options. Second thing that we're going to look at is the perceived benefits of moving to wireless, so effectively what people put into their original business cases, and then we're going to look at the reality and how that measures up. The third topic that we're going to talk about is what are other regions doing with wireless? So what do we see in Europe and across the Americas that we don't see in the Asia Pacific region, for example? And are there any things that APAC is doing that we don't see elsewhere? And the fourth and final topic that we'll come on to is will wireless remain relevant as the ATM channel evolves? Once we've done that, then we will then go on to a Q&A that will be hosted by Sandra with myself and Michael Johnson. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the operating models, I think there are 2 key areas to look at. So in terms of ATMs, we're all familiar with the fact that really there are off-premise and on-premise models for deployment. So if you're a bank, an on-premise deployment is effectively anything that goes into a branch. Typically, those are then connected up to the branch connectivity, so that would be a WAN or LAN type deployment. So generally, those tend to be sort of out of scope from a wireless connectivity perspective. What definitely is sort of more relevant are the off-premise deployments, where a number of different connectivity methods are used. So if we look at the traditional deployments, these tended to be broadband-based, where the in-country infrastructure allowed such a solution. Some off-premise ATMs may still be on dial-up type methods of connectivity, but effectively physical connectivity, physical lines that if you need to move the device, you need to move the comms, versus wireless. So, you know, in general, that meant that they were slow to install because you needed a carrier to come and install a physical line. They were slow to move for exactly the same reason, in that you had to move not just the ATM, but also the comms, and slow to decommission. And with large estates, what our customers would typically tell us is that, you know, when they were managing all of these lines, it was quite easy for some of those lines that, you know, the ATM had been removed on, for the line to remain active and costs still to be incurred because of the sheer quantity of lines, and that this was easy to miss, and sometimes billing particularly can be very difficult to discern and break down to identify any overcharges. So those are effectively sort of challenges that people had. If this is the only connectivity method, so quite often what we'd see is people deployed either on a broadband only type solution or on a dial only type solution. The challenge that you then have is that if your carrier incurs an outage, effectively your service is hard down. There are a number of things that cause that: the exchange going down, the network as a whole going down, issues with data centers, anything of that nature. So generally, what executives within these businesses are looking at is how can we improve the level of service, reduce the level of cost, and reduce the mean time to revenue for the ATM channel. And that's traditionally why they have has been a growing interest in wireless type solutions. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So when we have a look at the in theory versus the in practice for wireless, if we go back to sort of the original business case that would have been written here, for wireless ATMs, they're likely to contain 4 items. So those are quicker IMAC, and by that we mean installs, moves, and changes. So anytime that you have to physically pick up the machine and move it. There's the router costs. There's looking at the uptime potential improvements that can be achieved, and there's cost savings. So if we look at those in practice to understand how wireless technologies tend to measure up, well, wireless certainly does speed up the installation process. So that's really because there's no waiting for a line installation. You know, you're not waiting on a PSTN line to be installed, and there's no in-site cabling. Secondly, in terms of sending the routers out, if they've got a SIM preloaded, they can just go in the van with the ATM and the engineer, and everything can go live in one visit. Sometimes when waiting on carriers, you know, people can think that the line's been installed. It hasn't. It can lead to multiple visits, increasing the cost. So then if we look at the reusable pillar, then I think it's fair to say that it is very reusable, because when I deinstall my ATM, I can return my router to the shelf and then reuse it at another site with minimal reconfiguration, just sort of the addition of ATM ID type details. In terms of reliability, I think this is one that has hugely changed and has opened up the viability of wireless technologies over the last few years. So I think when we started on this wireless journey and we were sort of using 2G and maybe 3G technologies, those were really built with sort of voice in mind. As we've moved through 3 to 4 and, you know, increasingly starting to see the horizon of 5G, these are much more built around data delivery, which is much more suited to ATMs delivering data packets. In terms of cost savings, when we compare to a traditional wired connections, whether that's DSL or moves to fibre more latterly, wireless connectivity is definitely working out as more cost effective. And so I think broadly what we can say is that in practice, the theoretical benefits that people first identified are proven, but as with any technical solution, there are challenges. And what these can be things like mobile coverage can still in some areas be patchy. I'm sure we all know of a local black spot for our local carrier. And this can be down to a number of things. It can be lack of masks in some areas. It can be technical coverage. So, for example, if you're trying to put an ATM into something like a car park or a large concrete structure, you can get Faraday cage type technical issues. So typically what happens is that banks end up doing coverage tests. So whether they're doing that by carrier maps or the good old fashioned sending the engineer to wave their phone around and see what kind of coverage they have. Potentially that can mean that you can end up with multiple SIM partners to ensure surety of cover. So this can be a challenge. In terms of the other challenge that people typically run up against, is that it can be very difficult to get an SLA on a wireless service, particularly if it's a sort of single SIM connecting to one carrier. And so what then sort of happens is people end up having to have that secondary provider to give them some ability of failover and to put some disaster recovery type abilities into the service, which can add to costs, give people multiple vendors to manage. So there are different ways to approach it, but I think broadly those are the pros as well as the cons that people have typically identified. Next slide, please. So in terms of global trends, let's talk about satellite and single carrier versus roaming type solutions. So APAC has typically opted for single carrier solutions. So why? The main reason for that is cost. Roaming solutions are undoubtedly more expensive in terms of price point than a roaming solution. And with steering and preferencing, often don't work as advertised. So this is a common question that I get from a product perspective, which is, someone will say to me, well, we took a roaming SIM from a carrier, we had a play around with it, and what we discovered was that it was potentially taking a long time, it was hanging on various carriers, it was taking a long time to cycle through and to connect onto other networks, which wasn't the expectation that we had. Now, there are solutions out there that are capable of solving these types of problems, because typically from a carrier's perspective, they will all sign reciprocity agreements, effectively saying that they will allow each other to carry each other's traffic for a price. Typically what that carrier will then do is they will set a steering preference on the SIM that goes by order of cheapness. So whoever will charge them the least for carrying the traffic is the way that the network the SIM will attempt to connect to first. Now, generally what we find is this is counterintuitive to people, and when you explain this is the way around that it works, that it's not based on data quality, signal strength, any of those sort of much useful metrics in terms of will the solution be capable of carrying my data packets effectively across the network. Those are the type of measures that are important to a deployer to achieve good uptime, but the product actually tends to work the way around. Generally, the cheapest network is because of lack of coverage for that carrier. So there are some products that actually work around that. And so I would just advise you that, not all roaming products are the same. Do make sure you understand whether your product selects on data quality as opposed to just roaming based on price. There are some countries where we are starting to see some things that are interfering with the ability to do roaming. So roaming bans is a big one. Sometimes it can be at a carrier level. So, for example, we sit here in Australia today, and Telstra and Vodafone very sort of publicly banned each other from roaming onto each other's networks through 2017. And there are also some countries where permanent roaming, and by that we mean a device with a SIM in it that is roaming over carriers' networks all the time, so like a POS or an ATM that's permanently connected, as opposed to temporary roaming, which is I land in the country with my mobile phone and then a week later I set off and my roaming traffic goes away. So Why do countries ban it? Well, I think there can be two key reasons. One can be financial. So when a high degree of tax revenues are delivered by in-country telcos that can't be realised from overseas operators, there can be financial incentives for governments to support their local telcos. And sometimes there can be security concerns because roaming and wireless solutions tend to get wrapped up into the M2M technology bundle, which is obviously developing in all sorts of different directions. So it can just be more a lack of confidence in how those models will work out. So if we then talk about how we see the trend in roaming for APAC, and what I'd like to do is compare it to Europe. And that's because we've seen such a high degree of take-up of permanent roaming solutions across Europe. So what operating conditions are there that differ from here? Well, the key one really is EU law. So the EU regulated over 27 markets that operators must charge the same fees for using the same services, even if their customers move between those countries. So for an example, an Irish citizen can fly to Rome and still be paying domestic prices. So this has been taken up, as you would expect, enthusiastically by ATM deployers keen to take up the subsidised pricing models that have been legislated into law. And so is it likely that this could happen in APAC? I guess it could, but we need to have a concerted sort of multi-government effort with governments and with governments, if anything, having incentives to protect their own domestic telcos and tax revenues. I think it's probably unlikely. However, there are products out there that deliver a service that can fail over to multiple telcos based on data integrity and service coverage. And this provides enhanced uptime and further tightens reusability of equipment. And certainly means that you don't have to have multiple telco relationships because the SIM is capable in one step of connecting to them all, which can drive out cost. But really, whether such products are available within your specific country will come down to your country's regulations. So that would be the place to start as to whether roaming is a viable option for you. The other trend that we do see across APAC specifically, and we see very little in the rest of the world, is the take-up of VSAT. So this is satellite technology being used in ATMs. So generally, where do we see this? Well, mostly where physical infrastructure is either historically poor or geographically unviable. So if you look at countries that are sort of multiple island nations, rolling out a sort of a fibre broadband service would probably be cost prohibitively expensive. And so in that same vein, quite often then, sort of the number of masts for SIMs are quite limited. The challenge and why we don't see more take-up of VSAT technology, because it is extremely reliable, is generally that it's also very expensive. And so where it tends to be applicable to countries and where we do see adoption in ATM type marketplaces, it's tended to be because a sovereign government has invested in the technology. So we see that in places like India and Indonesia. And then they offer it to the market at a very subsidised price. And so typically we see that the take-up is high where it's available at a subsidised price, but where it isn't, certainly when we're looking at ATM type deployments as opposed to sat phones for mining and exploration and those types of things, it tends to be cost prohibitive just for driving an ATM. Next slide, please. So if we just come on to future fit, let's talk about how long wireless will be around and whether we think it will be part of the future of ATMs. So we hear quite a lot that cash is declining, but doing my research for this webinar, I looked up the number of transactions per annum, and I was heartily pleased to see that it's still around 99 billion transactions per year. So I think that's still a pretty reasonable number to be going on with. And in fact, numbers are, if anything, of ATM transactions are predicted to rise. So by 2021, we expect perhaps another 4 million or so transactions added to that number. With ATMs edging ever closer to being banks in a box, and significantly cheaper to build and maintain than branch networks, and obviously they don't have to be permanently staffed, they've ceased to become just cash dispensers, and I now think it's truly fair to say that they've genuinely become automatic tellers at this point. So if we look at what ATMs are now capable of, in addition to sort of cash dispensing and balance inquiries and all those things that we know evolve, they're also accepting both cash and check deposits that are going directly into people's bank accounts. They can be used to order things like checkbooks, apply for loans, set up banking instruction orders. They can transfer money from one account to another, retrieve and print account statements. So there's a whole range of services there. Some ATMs that we see across Asia Pac are even capable of opening a bank account, and for existing customers, allowing them to update their KYC details, that's Know Your Customer details. This is in addition to, we see some ATMs that are dispensing multiple currencies. So, for example, we see this quite a lot at travel, airports, ports, that type of thing. Many are doing advertising, both of a bank to own products, but also sometimes third-party products. And we're seeing things like mobile phone top-up also available. So I think when people hear phrases like decline of cash, they tend to automatically draw a straight line to decline of ATMs. And I think given the range of services that we see on ATMs, I don't think it's quite as simple as that. So what does this mean for wireless and ATMs? Well, traditionally, a downside of wireless was that ATMs have large software bills, getting larger by the day, and sending those downloads over wireless was very expensive. But then you had to compare that to your only other viable option, which was really sending an engineer to load gold disks, which was even more expensive. Could also be unreliable in the old days, so sort of going back to 2 or 3G, when you were trying to send lots of data over a service primarily designed for voice, you would get failure rates and things of that nature, which would mean you'd have to send downloads again. I think what we've definitely seen is that with each generation, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and we're hopeful even more so once we move on to 5G, the data delivery has been enhanced within the solution design, and that's certainly seen things like uptime improvements. The other thing that has happily coincided with that is that data packages have also got a great deal cheaper. So you're generally getting a great deal more data put into your bundle for around a similar price. So we think because of that, because it's getting better, faster and cheaper all at the same time, it's going to continue to be an extremely viable and suitable technology over the long term. So I think the key sort of takeaway that I would have really is, you know, ATMs can deliver more services for customers than they've ever been able to, and I think that's only going to grow. It's a very trusted channel and a financially responsible one. You know, it's certainly far easier to stick to a budget when it's cash in your physical wallet, and the ease of contactless and the tremendous ease with which it's easy to lose track of your spending. But all of this innovation drives the need to support, manage and download, you know, more software and things like that to your remote estates and better understand your network. And generally, my sort of general call to everyone in charge of ATM deployment is, please do think about your telecommunications infrastructure. It is your link to your ATM estate. And so I strongly ask you to consider the plumbing early. Because if you build in the capacity and the resilience to your design, then you're set up to support all of your successful innovation over time. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll hand back to Sandra, who will walk us through the Q&A portion of the webinar.
Yes, thanks, Catherine, so much for that presentation. It's certainly very positive to hear how cash remains strong. Transactions, I recall 99 billion transactions, and you predict that to rise in 2021. And also how the role of the ATM continues to deliver more services and is referred as a trusted service throughout the world. So very positive feedback on that. I have one question just going forward. How do you see, or how do you expect that countries will start pushing for cashless societies?
Thanks, Sandra. It's Michael Johnson here, and thank you for all joining the webinar. So in terms of how soon we expect countries will start pushing for cashless societies, you know, whilst the technologies for cashless societies are advancing, with the current performance, we still believe that sometime in the future. If we do some comparisons back to the UK, as some things that Catherine referenced to, which is a British consumer campaign body, just completed and some research and released that shows that the British banks are being hit by IT or security failures that prevent customers from making payments at an average rate of more than one a day. There were 302 incidents that prevented customers from making payments in the last 9 months of 2018. So the Financial Controller Authority, the FCA, there have put in requirements that banks report major operational or security incidents, and there's some calls for a regulator with sole responsibility for cash infrastructure. We see similar, you know, similarities in APAC in terms of those interruptions. So on that basis, we still see some time before we will see a full push into a cashless society.
Excellent. Just another question. What is the right number of ATMs per head?
That's a great question, Sandra. It really it changes over time as population changes. Obviously, there's other things that factor into that: financial inclusion programs, there's technology advancements, there's consumer demand. TNS actually conducted some research, and we see some very vast variances of ATMs per head across our region in Asia Pacific. So, you know, countries like Australia, Thailand and Taiwan have, you know, over 110 ATMs per 100,000 of populations. But then we have, you know, other ranges like Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore that sit between 45 to 65 ATMs per 100,000. And then at the lower end, we've got, you know, Sri Lanka, India and Philippines that are in the 10s and 20s per 100,000. So, you know, the right balance depends on the other factors in those countries, but we would expect certainly that where the lower coverage that you know, at the lower end there, that they will certainly grow faster in terms of the ATMs than others, maybe in the mature markets like Australia.
Understand. Well, I suppose that leads me on to my next question. How do we encourage usage of ATMs in underserviced demographics like millennials?
Another good question. I've got a teenage daughter, so it's very front of mind for me as well. So I think the simple thing is that we need to restate the value of cash to these types of demographics. So millennials in particular are heavy users of things like budgeting apps to track their spending habits. You know, maybe we can change and show the interest around the harness of showing the value of cash in your as a budgeting tool, looking into your wallet to see how much you have before you spend as a way to make decisions. I know that's how I try and educate my daughter, and I think that's certainly something that we can do around the education piece and make sure everyone understands the value of cash.
Definitely, it certainly needs to be focused on onto that group. At this stage, I'd just like to thank you all for your time today and being part of the forum. I'd like to thank both Catherine and Michael for their time and giving us an insight to what's on offer at TNSI. There's no doubt this industry is facing challenges and change, but our industry remains strong and our fundamentals positive. ATNIA has a lot on the horizon, and we look forward to working with you all, with our members in the years to come. Don't forget, if you'd like further information on membership, upcoming webinars, to visit our website, www.atmia.com. If you have any further questions in relation to today's webinar, please feel free to contact either Catherine or Michael at any time. As mentioned earlier, this webinar has been recorded and the link will be forwarded to you all tomorrow. I'd just like to thank you all again for your time, and have a great day. Thank you.